All right. Are you going to let us know when we're ready to go? Oh, we are live. Great. Well, we are live. Well, welcome. I'm Sylvie Légère. I'm the host of the podcast Trust Your Voice and also the co-founder of the Policy Circle. And we are here at the Policy Circle 6th Annual Leadership Summit in Fort Worth, Texas, at the beautiful Hotel Drover. And I am here with my good friend and board member and host of the podcast, She Said, Laura Kaplan.
Thank you, Sylvie. I'm so happy to be here on your podcast once again, and really happy to be here at the Policy Circle. It's one of these events that I look forward to all year. And it's sort of a competition between whether my brain is more overloaded than my heart, or my heart is more overloaded than my brain. I feel a lot of inspiration from the women in this group, and really honored to serve on the board and to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the theme of this year's summit is thriving communities. So all day we have heard about on panels covering really all the facets of what makes a thriving communities, from education, from development, from having a vision for a community and how to involve and engage with communities. And I think it ties really nicely with the theme of our podcast today, which is about knowing your power to influence.
Right.
Because it's interesting, the common theme, and we heard from the mayor of Fort Worth, and one of the things that she said was really people need to be involved in their local communities. The news cycle, everything covers just what's happening at a national level, where we don't have a lot of say and a lot of influence. But locally, we could do a lot. But we have to know that we have this power to influence.
Right, absolutely. And understanding that the influence that we have doesn't have to always be something that we would consider to be so macro, right? You don't necessarily have to change the world. And by the way, the little things that you do where you have influence over someone else can actually be those world-changing types of opportunities for them. You just don't necessarily realize that. I think, Sylvie, I'll tell a quick story about at least one of the ways that we got to know each other. One of your fellow founding board members introduced us, Kathy Hubbard introduced us, and we hit it off, I think it's fair to say, and you had me moderate a panel for, I guess, the second policy summit that you guys hosted, and then you called me up a few days later, not having known me very long, and said, I've been thinking about your next life, what you might want to do next, and I think you'd be great at doing a podcast. And of course, I'd never listened to a podcast, much less thought about hosting a podcast. And when I thought about it, it made all the sense in the world. But the thing is, about that story, I would never have done that on my own. It probably would not have occurred to me if Sylvie had not made the suggestion and sort of given me that push and really illustrated influence in a way that it made a real direct impact on my life. Now here we are 5 years later, right?
Yeah, you have like
hundred,
episode
yeah.
200.
200 hours of content.
200 episode. I'm actually episode 1,
Sylvia's
so I'm
episode
actually
1.
really bottom on the list of
No,
episodes.
that's the top of the list.
But it took, I have to say that it took a lot of courage also on my part to, I think I was going on a run. I was like, oh, Laura has such great questions, the way she interviews, she's so thoughtful. And I felt, she can really be a beacon of light, or someone who shines the light of people who are making a difference. And I thought of the different medium, and you had talked to me about doing a blog, and I was just like, yeah, blog, there's a lot of blogs out there, harder to maybe do something different. And so that's how I suggested. But it took a lot of courage for me to make that suggestion to you, because you're so accomplished, you are involved in so many things, and I didn't know you really well actually at all. Yeah. And so it took a lot even for me to be a spark. But I think that's one example of the power that we have to influence if we say, yes, I can be a spark for someone. I can ignite a new level of confidence. I can push people to expand their comfort zone and do something. So,
how would you, if I posed the question to you, or you were giving somebody who's listening advice, how do you build that courage and that confidence to reach out, even though it's a little scary, maybe to reach out to someone that you don't know? Maybe it's an acquaintance, maybe it's a community leader or a legislator or someone like that. Maybe what's your advice for building your courage and confidence in that?
well, this is kind of a soft throw here in terms of, that's where I feel like the policy circle, the platform itself, the magic happens, in the way you're making connection. But the model of the policy circle initially is to host a conversation. So that takes courage, number one, because you have to invite people to come for lunch or for just later in the evening, but you have to invite people to engage in a very intentional conversation about a meaty topic, which is a lot harder to do than to say, come to a gin tasting at my house, right? Like, why don't we come and discuss taxes? Or, why don't we come and discuss literacy, right? It takes a lot of courage, right? So just that pushes you to build a new level of confidence, because it takes courage to invite people that you may not know really well, or that you may know in a very social setting, and you don't know what they will share. Will they be vulnerable? And inevitably, the conversation that is around a brief, where people have to read and they have to come prepared to share what we call their lens of care. So their lens of care might be personal, it might be professional because they're acting into this environment, it might be influencing it, and it might be just in their civic life, how they are volunteering, how they see their community. And it's also the lens of care, I feel, are also either very personal at a community level, at a national level, or even at a global level. And once you start sharing that, you're inviting people to be vulnerable and to share parts about their lives that they generally do not have a forum to share, right? My friend here, Andrea, was sharing, she was just part of a conversation around literacy and shared that some of her family members had challenges with literacy, and she never really talked about that, right? Like, that's being really vulnerable. My neighbor, was saying how their foster care daughters that they've now adopted will never reach grade level literacy. And that's a hard thing to share. But the policy circle roundtable discussion give you a forum for people to share more about themselves. And I'm saying this because it allows people to share about their vision for the world, for themselves, their own perhaps shortcomings or things that there's challenges that they're faced with, and also what they want to do. And once you hear that from people, you are developing such a deeper relationship with people that you can see the potential in them. And you can therefore be a spark and invite them to do something, stretch themselves a little bit and expand their comfort zone.
And the more you do it too, just to add to your point, the more you do it, the more you practice that skill, including how you practice with the person who, for them, taxes might not be the kind of thing that lights up their soul, and that is okay. There are other issues, right? Practice. Someone's going to turn you down when you say, hey, would you come to my house to talk about taxes? And she says, I don't think so. Of course, you need to go back at her and try it again.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But the practice, right? And circling back with her, or continuing to send her something, but not letting the getting turned down and the rejection of that be the thing that completely dissuades you from your goal. The same thing with reaching out to community leaders and to legislators and others. The more you practice that, the less scary it becomes, right?
Yeah, I mean, same with, we talked about here about the importance of the people that you elect in really local office and being involved, right? But for that, you need to interact with candidates, which is really intimidating. And I still remember getting that first phone call from a candidate, asking for a contribution to their campaigns and everything. And you're just like, oh, you see, it was a number. It's unknown. I don't pick it up, right? Or something, or a number I don't know. And this time I answered, and you're on the phone. You're like, oh, do I really? I'm like, oh no. And then I'm like, you know what? I need to walk my talk.
Exactly.
So I kind of interacted, I'm like, I am going to interact with this person and say, what is your vision? Where do you stand on red tape? How do you feel about budget or fiscal responsibility? And I hung up, and I think I called my husband. I'm like, I'm so happy. I just did it. I actually had a conversation with the congressional candidates. But it takes courage to do that. And like you said, you have to practice. And the more you do, the more you build the confidence to do it. But you also need to expand your knowledge. And I think this is where, again, the purpose of this summit, of exploring these tough issues and bringing people together to learn about it, is also the way that you expand your knowledge, so that when you meet people, you can find commonality.
Right.
You can find something that they're interested in, and you can connect with, and therefore quickly develop a richer relationship with people. And then you have become, because of that relationship, you have a power to influence that person, because you can become a sounding board, which ultimately, this is what we want all of Policy Circle women to become, is sounding boards for our policymakers.
Yeah. We talk a lot about building and sustaining influence in our careers on my podcast, She Said podcast, which, as we talked about, Sylvie inspired. And one of the elements associated that I find a pretty consistent thread with, I would say, almost every, if not every single guest, is her ability to understand how to curate her story and also how to edit her story. And that's a really compelling and powerful component of building influence, because it's what reminds you of what makes you and your position, your thoughts, your input so unique and so valuable to that person that maybe you're advocating on behalf of a cause, or you're trying to influence them in some way. It can be really helpful to have clarity on your story and understanding what are those elements in my story that makes me unique.
Yeah,
right?
I think one of my podcast episode is with Natalie Sabourin, and we talk about Strength Finder. And she has a really great way, and if people are familiar with this, it is a test from Gallup, and it's called the Clifton Strength Test. And what's very useful with this test, that you develop a vocabulary to express the value that you are bringing to the table, because it classifies like 34 strengths, and you realize what are your top 5 or 10, but also what are your bottom 10. And it gives you words to describe yourself on LinkedIn, to describe the value that you are bringing, so that to add to your story.
Right.
In a way. It's like, well, this is what I do. This is what I do well. There's one word, individualization or something like that, where it's like you could see the potential in others, and this is kind of my unique.
It is
my
absolutely.
unique gift,
Yeah,
right? It's like
sure.
I can see the potential in others, and then spark that, right?
Yeah.
But it came out in the Strength Finder, so which is
totally
weird, but yes.
Well, and I think too, to Sylvie's point, really turning to your mentors, to your tribe, to the women and men who are part of your circle, or to people whose opinions you respect, and really listen when you ask them, hey, what are those elements of my story? Like, get help if you're struggling with this, which you would not be not only alone, but you would be unusual if it were easy for us to tell our stories. For some weird reason, we tend to have a harder time telling our own stories than other people do, sort of seeing things in our stories and what makes us unique and valuable. And so getting that input from our mentors, from the people around us who see, like you did, something that I was not really able to see in myself, that's a very valuable thing and such a gift to have from someone else.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's also this idea that you you have to develop kind of your own like set of mentors or relationship with people that you feel are good sounding boards, so that when you feel stuck, you have someone to call. Like so often I call you, actually.
Yeah. Well, I call this an investment strategy, right? I grew up in sort of banking and finance roles. I worked in public policy roles, but focused on banking and finance. And so the idea of, accrual capital, like where you're generating income by investing, continually investing. The same thing is true for relationships, right? When you're investing them, you never know how what the return's going to look like in that regard. So.
Yeah, but it's again, I feel like this is a little bit where hosting conversations on tough topics allows you to discover and learn about people differently, and this is where you can start finding your mentors or your personal board of advisors, because you are able to get to know people better, much better than perhaps in other setting. And I feel like this is also something at work, in a professional environment, as you move up in leadership, you are asked to connect the dots between different departments, but also with the community in which your company operates, with the state level, with government that impacts your business operations. And you need to be comfortable in those circles and those conversations. So this is where, I feel the policy circle model allows you to become comfortable in those conversations, because you've hosted them or participated in them in a place where it's just really informational, right? It's just about discussing ideas. But when you get to the boardroom, you are able to actually ask the right question and comfortable about it and speak up. So I think that's another way of being able to kind of know the power of your influence, because the words that you say matter, and your voice matters in every setting.
Yeah, to take my point about investment a little bit further, what Sylvie just talked about, this idea of practicing, is also an investment in yourself, right? You're investing in yourself to make yourself smarter in order to contribute in a way that will have even more impact. So again, it's that idea of investing in yourself. Sometimes people hear that and they think, gosh, that sounds a little selfish, investing in myself. But the reality is, if you don't invest in yourself, it makes it much harder to contribute to other people. And there's that great story, which I shared in the breakout a little while ago. Every time you get on an airplane to go on a trip, they say, you put your oxygen mask on before you help the person next to you, because you'll be too weak to do anything helpful if you're not taking care of yourself. And so it's really hard to engage in a healthy, constructive way in our communities, in our families, with our children, if we're not also paying attention to investing in ourselves. So I think that's another great illustration of what that looks like as it relates to influence.
Yeah, and as it relates, so I mean, we covered several dimensions of knowing your power influence. I think the other piece, maybe we could talk about is focus. So we were just in a session with Kristen Cox, who is actually based in Utah, and she has an amazing talk. She's a systems thinker, and she gave a presentation on how to solve impossible problems. And I just love how actually candid she is, that not every problem needs to be solved, and also that the importance of focus. And I think that is the thing that everything is so complex. Every problem is so complex that it's really hard to find a focus and be okay with saying, this is the one area that I am focused on and I'm going to be successful. I'll give you an example. We hosted a conversation about aging. And we have a brief about the future, aging in the 21st century. What does it mean? One of the things that came out is aging is poverty amongst aging women in particular who outlive their husband and end up alone, and the poverty in women, and it stems from financial literacy. So what we did is we did a brief on financial literacy. We hosted a program on financial literacy. And for me, I kind of took it as my one area of focus in the area of education in high school is to say, well, what are we providing in terms of financial literacy in the school where my kids go to, right? I'm starting there. So it's about finding focus. And I think this is where, again, these policy circle conversations and the brief that present a multitude of challenges and reforms, but also good ideas, allow us to find the focus and find the solution that we want to move forward in the space, the immediate space that we want to influence.
And making choices about those things, right? You can literally boil the ocean and never get anything done, which was sort of, Kristen's point. She didn't say it quite that way. But the reality is there's always lots and lots of problems to solve, and you have to be decisive if you want to move the ball at all on maybe 2 or 3 things as opposed to the 35 things that probably need some help. You've got to pick and choose, otherwise you'll never be able to move it forward. And I thought her presentation was such a great illustration of that idea. It's personal discipline, right? Again, it's investing in yourself in a way that's reinforcing that notion of personal discipline around focus, whether it's policy making or whether it's running your business or your household or going through your to-do list. If yours looks anything like mine, there's 100 things on it at any point in time. And so whittling that down so that you know on that particular day, you're going to focus on these 3 things. Like there's all that stuff on the list. You don't want to forget about it, but you got to have maybe 3 things that you can really do.
Yeah.
It applies to your personal life. It applies to your professional life. It applies to shaping policy.
Yeah, I think Kristen had a great way. I love that where she said power and the impact. Power is equal to volume and focus. So she had this image of a river, a rapid where it's really narrow and there's lots of water going through, and that's how electricity and power is formed. And I thought that was like the perfect visual, and I think that's what is really the key anchor to knowing your power to influence. So Laura, I'd love to it's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank
Perhaps you have like some lasting thoughts on knowing your power and using it?
Yeah. I'm so grateful to be here, and I think it's really important to be open to inspiration, to both be open to it and to be proactive about seeking it as opposed to just assuming that it's going to knock you on the head, and being open to those opportunities that sometimes present themselves to you that you weren't expecting, and really ask yourself hard before you say no. Ask yourself a real hard question about, I wonder why this idea was presented to me. And if it feels like something in your heart that you're supposed to do, even if you don't have all the answers, and even if you don't know exactly how to do it, sometimes the idea of thinking about that idea too much you can talk yourself out of that. And as women, again, a generalization, not every woman is like this, but many of us are, present company included, you can talk yourself out of something really amazing as opposed to just doing it and figuring it out and getting help as you're going through it. Like those can be, I think, really important elements. But, be proactive about inspiration. Attend events that speak to your soul, like the Policy Circle Summit, which is so amazing. And listen to podcasts, like she said, and trust your voice. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.
That's right. Well, thank you, Laura, for being here. This is our first live podcast.
My pleasure.
Well, so thank you so much. And yes, do subscribe and rate the show, and a nice 5-star will be appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie.